Welcome to Dark and Twisted Tales. Mark unlocked the door and walked into his quaint but small apartment. He'd had one hell of a day at the office and was completely exhausted. The boss was riding his ass about getting these reports finished by the deadline, and his coworkers were getting on his nerves with all the bullshit drama. He just wanted to make a quick dinner and relax. Mark lit the pilot light on the stove and hung his head in exhaustion. He could smell the faint gas coming from the burner. Something about that smell triggered a strange thought in his head. What if the stove just exploded? He thought. Well, at least I wouldn't have to go back to work, he chuckled to himself. He couldn't help but think about why life had to be so damn difficult. Every day just grinding away, and for what? So that he can come home, make dinner, and do it all over again? Why can't I just run the fucking lottery or hit it big at the casino? Why does every day have to be so damn hard? I don't even have any friends since I moved to this awful city. I'm so damn alone. He'd recently tried to fit in with his new coworkers, but he just felt like such an outsider. They'd gossip and talk about going to the bar after work and getting together to watch the game, but no one ever asked him directly if he wanted to join. He didn't want to impose and become more alienated, so he usually just kept quiet and did his work. He wondered if there was something wrong with him. Am I weird or something? What the hell makes me so different from Bob or Deborah? He even tried to cozy up to the office slut, as they called her, behind her back, and she even gave him some bullshit excuse. A pop sound coming from the burner snapped his attention back to the stove. He suddenly didn't feel like eating. Mark peered out the kitchen window and noticed the neighbor across the street in their apartment. Just like he had done for the last few weeks since he moved into the new little pad, he gave the neighbor a wave, and just like clockwork, they shot a wave right back. Every night when he had gotten home and went into the kitchen to make dinner, sure as shit, the dark silhouette of a man or woman could be seen doing the same. Because of the distance and the low lighting in both apartments, he could never really get a good look. He just knew that they were always friendly and they waved back at him. Who knows, maybe it's some hot model who feels as lonely as I do. Or maybe it's a great guy with similar interests as mine, and we could become friends, he thought. Either way, he was sick of feeling so damn lonely all the time. He was so sick of the same old boring routine. It was always come home, eat, watch a little TV, and go to bed. The only thing exciting that ever happened was when there was a car accident down on the street. He would just sit there in his apartment and watch from above as paramedics and police arrived to help whoever was hurt. He lived on a pretty busy street in a high-rise, so it was a pretty common occurrence to see things like that. The other night his stove caught fire, and that was pretty exciting, even though it only lasted a few minutes. The point was that there had to be something else out there, something more than just slowly dying in this apartment. He wanted to mix things up a little bit. Since he transferred for work to the city a few weeks ago, he hadn't met anyone except the nice doorman at his building. In fact, he never really saw anyone ever coming or going at all in the last few days. His hours at work were a little bit wacky, so he figured it was just the time of night that he'd been coming home. Mark decided he was going to do something a little different tonight. It was a short day at work, so it wasn't incredibly late, and he had sort of caught a second wind. He decided he was going to go across the street, find the apartment, and knock. Besides, he felt like he and the neighbor were practically friends considering how many times they've waved hello at each other. He grabbed his coat and his keys and walked out the door. As usual, he didn't run into anyone on the way down except for Fred, the doorman.
Hey there, Fred. Nice night for a walk, huh?
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Jones. Very nice night for a walk.
You working hard or hardly working?
Oh, Mr. Jones, I'm always working.
Mark slipped outside and lightly jogged across the street. He came to a building and noticed the doors were incredibly similar to the ones in his building. Just before he walked in, he stopped and wondered, is this a good idea? He thought to himself. Man, what if they get freaked out by me just stopping by? Or if they think I'm some kind of lonely psychopath and I want to wear their skin as a coat? He shook his head and couldn't help but laugh at the silly thoughts he was having. Mark walked in and headed to the elevator. On the way, he scanned the large lobby. It was very strange, he thought to himself. The same architect who designed his building must have designed this one too. Everything looked so much alike. The front desk was the same, even in the same place, and the elevators, the bathrooms were even located in the same spots. Strangely enough, it was just as quiet as his building. He didn't see a single soul in the main lobby. He was half expecting to see the doorman Fred's twin brother somewhere, but there was absolutely no one there. The place was a ghost town, and it gave him the creeps. Mark stepped into the elevator and pressed the number 3. Even the elevator had the same smell as the one in his building. Not a bad smell, but it just gave off like a leathery smell, like the inside of a new car. The neighbor had lived exactly across from him, so it had to be on the same floor. The doors dinged and Mark exited. He knew which room it had to be based on where he lived. The hallways were exactly the same, so he had no problem navigating his way around. Here it is, room 307, he thought. This was the place, same room number and all. In fact, everything he'd seen up to this point had been the exact same. He stood there for a minute, really second-guessing if this was a good idea. And then he crossed his fingers and whispered,
Please be a lonely, hot supermodel. Oh my gosh. I hope they don't. I hope they're not looking at me through the peephole. Now they see that I'm talking to myself, so that's just wonderful.
Mark took a deep breath and knocked on the door. After 10 seconds or so with no answer, he knocked again. This time it was a little harder. To his surprise, the door slowly opened with a loud creaking sound. He didn't want to intrude, but he had this nagging feeling that he needed to go inside.
Hello? Is anyone in there? Hey, I'm the guy that lives across the street. The one that you've been waving to lately? Look, I'm not crazy or anything.
He immediately shook his head and closed his eyes, regretting that last part. After yet again getting no response, he had this strong sense that maybe something was wrong. So he stuck his head in to take a look. As he took a look inside the apartment, he froze with fear. His eyes widened and his heart started to race. He felt a warm sensation come over his entire body. Slowly, Mark opened the door and took a few steps in. What the hell is going on? He thought to himself. This was his apartment, only it was different. Everything had been burned. There were char marks up and down the walls. The table, his table, was completely burnt and half missing. The pictures of his family members on the walls were blackened by smoke. He was terrified and bewildered. He didn't understand what was happening. This was his apartment, but it was destroyed by some kind of fire. Suddenly, the TV turned on. The news was on.
Tonight, our top story. 2 men killed in an apartment fire. An apartment complex doorman was killed late last night when he was on break and noticed smoke coming from under one of the tenant's doors. Witnesses say that 60-year-old Fred Lancaster broke into the apartment of 30-year-old Mark Jones to help him, but he and the tenant were both found deceased from smoke inhalation and burns. The victims' families have been notified.
Mark stared at the TV. He was very confused. He didn't know what to think. He slowly backed away.
No. No, this isn't real. I'm imagining this. I'm dreaming. Like this. I'm gonna close my eyes, and when I open them, I'm gonna be back in my apartment. and everything's gonna be okay.
But it wasn't okay. Mark opened his eyes and he was still standing in this room that was destroyed by a fire. He felt so sick. He ran straight to the bathroom and burst through the charred bathroom door. He vomited all over the blackened sink. He cleaned his mouth with the sleeve of his coat and took a couple deep breaths. Mark then looked up and took a glance at the bathroom mirror and wiped away the thick black soot that covered it. He stared at his reflection with horror. His eyes were completely melted. He could see one of his cheekbones protruding from where his skin used to be. The entire top layer of his face had been burned off. Mark became lightheaded and vomited in the sink a second time. Suddenly, he smelled something that made his hands tremble. It was the distinct smell of gas from the stove. At that moment, everything came flooding back to his mind. Today was Thursday. The last thing he remembered was being at work on Monday morning. He remembered the guys at work talking about going to watch the Monday night football game. These last few days, he hadn't even been to work at all. All he remembered was coming home after that and putting something on the stove to cook, and then he passed out from exhaustion. Mark had to get the hell out of there. He left the bathroom and ran through the dismantled apartment. He burst through the front door, down the elevator, and back across the street.
Glad to see you back, sir.
Fred said to him as he ran back into his building's doors. He glanced at Fred and saw that Fred's face was burned just like his. He had blackened and melted skin hanging from his chin and forehead. He could see most of his skull, and there were just black holes where his eyes should be. Mark looked away and closed his eyes as he ran as fast as he could toward the elevator. He got into the elevator and hit the third-floor button. His heart was pounding, and he was sweating profusely. He stumbled out of the elevator, catching himself on the wall. Everything was spinning as if he'd been taking shots of liquor on an empty stomach. There was smoke filling the hallway, and it looked like it was coming from under the door of his apartment. Mark closed his eyes tightly, just wishing it would all go away. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes. The smoke was gone, and the hallway was no longer spinning. He wasn't hot, nor was he sweating anymore either. He calmly walked to the apartment door. Everything just felt like a distant memory. He got to his door and unlocked it. Mark went inside and threw his keys on the table. He was exhausted from a long day at the office. As he cooked a quick dinner on the stove, he noticed the neighbor across the street, and they both did the usual wave hello. He decided tonight was the night he was going to go introduce himself to the neighbor. Besides, he felt like they were friends anyway at this point, as many times as they've waved to each other. He grabbed his coat and his keys and went downstairs. As usual, he didn't run into anyone on his way down except for Fred the doorman.
Hey there, Fred. Nice night for a walk, huh?
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Jones. Very nice night for a walk.
You working hard or hardly working?
Oh, Mr. Jones, I'm always working.
Fred replied, with a smile.
Thank you for joining us on Dark and Twisted Tales. This week's episode, The Neighbor, was written and produced by Will Bowser. Join us next time as we delve into another dark and twisted story. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, and share. We would really appreciate it. Thank you, and good night.